It began on one of those quiet spring mornings that usually define life in a suburban neighborhood. The kind of morning where the lawns are freshly trimmed, the air smells faintly of cut grass and coffee, and the only real sound is the gentle hum of sprinklers misting across perfectly even yards. For months, everything on Maplewood Court had been calm, until the first letter arrived. The envelope was thin, white, and stamped with the crimson logo of the Maplewood Homeowners Association. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed in sterile font, quoting Section 12B, Exterior Ornamentation and Wildlife Attraction Regulations. It read that the homeowner was in violation due to multiple bird feeders installed on front and side yard areas, which allegedly attracted excessive wildlife and disrupted the uniform aesthetic of the community. The letter wasn't signed, but everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly who had written it. The HOA board's newest member, Nancy Whitfield, a self-proclaimed community enforcer, whose idea of joy was policing mailboxes for paint chips and measuring grass height with a ruler. She had moved into Maplewood Court less than a year ago, but somehow, she'd already made herself the unofficial guardian of the bylaws. Before Nancy arrived, Maplewood had been a place of quiet coexistence. People waved, shared lawn tools, and cared little about whether someone's mailbox leaned a few degrees off-center. But Nancy changed the atmosphere entirely. She turned the neighborhood into her own kingdom of order, and no detail escaped her scrutiny. The homeowner, a quiet, nature-loving person who had lived there peacefully for 6 years, found the accusation almost amusing at first. The bird feeders were simple, small, and harmless. A wooden feeder hanging from a tree branch, another perched near the porch, and one more tucked in the backyard. They attracted robins, sparrows, and the occasional cardinal. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. And, most importantly, it bothered no one. No one, that is, except Nancy. Her house stood across the street, a 2-story colonial-style home that looked as if it had been pulled straight from a suburban brochure. Every flower was evenly spaced, every window polished to perfection, and every inch of grass trimmed within HOA regulation limits. Her blinds were always open, as if she lived to watch. Neighbors often joked that she ran her home like a surveillance post, and it wasn't far from the truth. The second letter arrived 2 weeks later, this time hand-delivered by Nancy herself. Though the homeowner wasn't there to receive it, the security camera footage showed her striding confidently up the walkway, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of the yard. The letter this time was sterner, a $150 fine and a demand for immediate removal of unauthorized bird feeding devices. Still, the homeowner didn't comply. The feeders remained, swaying softly in the morning breeze, surrounded by the happy chatter of birds. But under the calm surface, irritation simmered. Nancy didn't stop there. She began patrolling the street, documenting supposed infractions from anyone who dared to break her vision of perfection. A neighbor's faded fence paint reported. A car parked slightly too long in front of the house reported. A child's chalk art on the sidewalk reported for graffiti. Soon, the homeowners group chat buzzed with frustration. People whispered about her at barbecues, laughed behind her back, but no one dared confront her directly. She had the board's ear, and she knew how to twist the rules to her advantage. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, another letter appeared, this one more aggressive than before. It warned that further non-compliance would lead to escalating fines and possible legal intervention. The homeowner read it twice, feeling the frustration rise like a slow burn. That night, while walking the dog past Nancy's home, something peculiar caught the eye, something small, colorful, and oddly out of place. On the edge of her roof, near the dormer windows, sat a tiny ceramic gnome, painted in red and blue, smiling mischievously under the moonlight. It wasn't alone. A closer look revealed more of them, 5 gnomes in total, each perched at different points along the shingles. Some were holding lanterns, others miniature tools, all staring out toward the street. It was whimsical, almost charming, but then the irony struck. Nancy, the same woman enforcing the HOA's strict ornamentation codes, had decorated her roof with a full display of garden figures. Section 9A of the HOA handbook clearly stated that decorative statues, ornaments, or displays may not exceed 2 in number and must be located in front yard planters or gardens, not elevated structures. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. For the first time, the homeowner smiled at the thought. The solution had been sitting right there all along, poetic justice, wrapped in ceramic paint. If Nancy wanted to play by the rules, then the rules she would face. The next few days were spent carefully documenting every gnome, every angle, every timestamp. The photos were crisp, the details clear. The homeowner even found the official purchase listing for the same gnome design online, confirming they were indeed ornamental statues. But instead of rushing to report her, the homeowner waited. Patience, after all, made revenge sweeter. Nancy continued her crusade, sending yet another fine, this time claiming continued non-compliance. Her tone grew more aggressive, her confidence louder. She even bragged at the monthly HOA meeting that she was cleaning up the street, 1 yard at a time. But her arrogance had blinded her. One morning, a new envelope appeared in the HOA's Dropbox, anonymous, but neatly formatted. Inside were the photographs, the handbook citations, and a formal report of Nancy Whitfield's multiple violations under Section 9A. Attached was a polite note recommending an inspection for non-compliant decorative installations. The next week, chaos erupted. The HOA inspection team, bound by their own rules, had no choice but to investigate. When they arrived at Nancy's property, their faces said it all: disbelief, amusement, and perhaps a little satisfaction. The sight of 5 ceramic gnomes lined up proudly on her roof was impossible to ignore. Nancy's fine notice arrived 2 days later, $250 for unauthorized roof ornaments, plus an order to remove them immediately. Neighbors started whispering. The same people she'd fined and reported now chuckled as they passed her house. The self-proclaimed enforcer had become the violator. Nancy tried to appeal, of course, claiming the gnomes were seasonal displays and temporary, but the board didn't budge. The rules were clear, and for once, they worked against her. The homeowner watched quietly as the first gnome came down, her face red with fury. Yet beneath the satisfaction, there was something else, a spark of curiosity. This wasn't the end. Nancy wasn't the type to surrender quietly. The day Nancy removed her gnomes, Maplewood Court felt unusually quiet, too quiet, almost artificial. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, pretending to check their mail or water their lawns, secretly watching the self-appointed HOA enforcer drag down her ceramic soldiers from the roof one by one. Each gnome made a hollow clink as it hit the driveway, like a final note to her pride. For most, that would have been the end of it, lesson learned, justice served. But Nancy Whitfield wasn't like most people. She didn't let things go. She brooded, she plotted, and she simmered in silent resentment. Losing to a neighbor, especially one she'd tried to humiliate, was something she could never stomach. Over the next few days, her behavior changed subtly. Her morning patrols became more frequent, her clipboard filled with more scribbles than ever, and her gaze seemed to linger longer on the house across the street, the one with the bird feeders that had started it all. At first, it was small. An HOA reminder notice slipped into the mailbox, referencing unapproved modifications to exterior lighting. Then came a citation for overgrown shrubbery, even though the hedges were trimmed perfectly. Every petty rule she could find, she weaponized, determined to reclaim her authority, but the homeowner wasn't rattled this time. Something in the balance of power had shifted. The neighbors had seen Nancy fall once, and the fear she once inspired had begun to fade. Her letters no longer carried the same weight, they carried an almost desperate tone now. Then came the twist that no one expected. Late one afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up to Nancy's house. The driver unloaded 3 large boxes, all marked fragile, decorative ceramics. The homeowner watched through the window, confused at first. Surely she wouldn't. Not again, but that evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, the faint glimmer of ceramic paint appeared once more. One by one, little figures began to return, not on the roof this time, but along her front yard, porch steps, and even her mailbox. Not just gnomes either, frogs, fairies, and flamingos stood guard like a tiny army of rebellion. Nancy had doubled down. By morning, the street was in disbelief. It looked like a garden statue festival exploded on her property. And yet, in her mind, she had found a loophole. Section 9A prohibited roof ornaments exceeding 2 in number, but said nothing about the ground-level display quantity, so long as they were tasteful and not obstructing pedestrian access. She had used the HOA rulebook like a weapon, twisting it into a shield. For days, she strutted proudly through her yard, pretending to garden while ensuring each figurine was perfectly positioned. The message was clear, she wasn't backing down. She wanted everyone to know that she could play this game better, louder, and longer, but what Nancy didn't know was that she had just walked straight into her own trap, because the homeowner had read the entire HOA handbook, not just Section 9A, but every clause, footnote, and amendment. Buried in the back, under a section most people ignored, was a little-known rule about visual nuisance accumulation, which classified any excessive ornamental clustering beyond reasonable proportion as a neighborhood harmony disturbance. The irony was too good to resist. Quietly, the homeowner began collecting evidence again. Photos of every figurine, each time-stamped and geotagged. Measurements of the spacing between ornaments. Notes on how the clutter spilled across the property line, obstructing part of the sidewalk. A full dossier was prepared, calm, factual, and perfectly aligned with the HOA's own standards, but instead of submitting it immediately, the homeowner waited. Nancy's ego grew bolder by the week. She began hosting HOA beautification walks, encouraging neighbors to take inspiration from her decorative display. Few attended, and those who did came more for entertainment than admiration. Her attempts to regain authority were met with polite smiles and suppressed laughter. The gossip spread quickly. "Did you see Nancy's front yard?" someone would whisper at the mailbox. "It's like a ceramic zoo." Another neighbor joked that he was afraid to mow near her sidewalk in case a gnome sued him. Still, Nancy pressed on, convinced she had regained her footing, until the day the official neighborhood compliance officer arrived. A silver SUV pulled up in front of her house, bearing the HOA logo. A man in a navy polo stepped out, clipboard in hand. He spent 30 minutes walking the property, taking photos, counting figurines, and jotting notes. Nancy followed him nervously, trying to explain that her decorations were community art, but the officer remained expressionless, nodding as he worked. When he finally left, she stood in her driveway looking pale. By evening, she had the letter. Formal notice of violation, excessive decorative displays, Section 11C, visual nuisance accumulation. A $500 fine. Immediate removal ordered, the news spread faster than wildfire. Screenshots of the letter circulated in the neighborhood group chat. The once feared Nancy became the street's biggest punchline. Someone even edited a photo of her lawn and captioned it, "Welcome to Gnomeville, population 83. But humiliation wasn't the only consequence. The HOA board, tired of her constant drama, called for an internal review of her position. Within days, a vote was held, and Nancy was temporarily suspended from the board, pending conduct evaluation. For the homeowner, it was victory, but a quiet one. There was no gloating, no confrontation. Just peace at last, the soft sound of birds returning to the feeders, and a sense of poetic balance restored, yet peace in Maplewood never lasted long. 2 weeks later, just as the air began to cool for autumn, strange things started happening. Birdseed went missing from the porch. Small dents appeared on the feeder poles, as if someone had taken a stick to them. One morning, the largest feeder was found shattered on the ground, birdseed scattered like confetti across the lawn. There were no witnesses, but everyone had a suspicion. Security cameras confirmed it days later, a shadowy figure, sneaking across the yard at night, wearing a hoodie and gloves, smashing the feeder with a metal rod. The footage was blurry, but the posture, the stride, unmistakably Nancy. It was no longer just about fines and rules. It had become personal. The homeowner reported it to the HOA, submitting the video as evidence. The board promised to review the incident, but their tone was weary. Nancy still had friends on the inside, and getting justice wouldn't be easy. That night, as the homeowner looked out the window, the faint outline of Nancy's house stood across the street, dark and silent. But something glimmered faintly under her porch light, a new ornament, shaped like a gnome, but painted entirely black. It wasn't store-bought. It looked handmade, eerie, symbolic. Nancy was sending a message, and the homeowner understood it clearly. The game wasn't over. It had just escalated. By the time autumn settled fully into Maplewood Court, the war between the bird feeders and the gnomes had taken on a life of its own. The neighborhood that once prided itself on quiet suburban order now felt tense, like the calm before a storm. The air had changed. Every passing glance, every twitch of a curtain, every hum of a leaf blower seemed charged with suspicion. Nancy Whitfield's reputation had collapsed, yet her resentment had only grown. She was no longer an HOA board member, no longer the self-proclaimed guardian of community order, but in her mind, she was still Maplewood's moral authority. She spent her days indoors now, rarely seen except for the moments she'd emerge at dusk to collect her mail, peering around like a predator stalking familiar ground. Her lawn, once littered with ornaments, now stood barren, the gnomes gone, the flowers wilted. It was as if she had erased everything that once defined her house. But across the street, the homeowner's yard still thrived. The bird feeders had been replaced and reinforced, standing taller, stronger, and brighter. The birds had returned too, robins, sparrows, finches, fluttering freely as if unaware of the silent feud unfolding below them. The sight that once brought peace now served as a daily reminder to Nancy that she had lost. Weeks passed quietly, but the calm felt unnatural. Then, late one night, the sound of movement returned, soft footsteps across damp grass, the faint creak of a fence. A motion light flickered on, casting long shadows. By morning, another feeder lay shattered on the lawn, the pole bent clean in half. This time, the homeowner didn't report it to the HOA. They knew better now. The board would drag its feet, investigate endlessly, and likely dismiss the case for insufficient evidence. Instead, the homeowner turned inward, patient, methodical. Revenge, they knew, worked best when served cold. The plan took shape quietly. It didn't involve confrontation or shouting. It would be poetic, measured, a reflection of everything Nancy had stood for and everything she had tried to destroy. For days, the homeowner researched, combing through the HOA's archives, digging into meeting notes, amendments, and email threads. Buried in the documentation was something peculiar, a record of Nancy's property inspection from 2 years earlier, just before she joined the HOA board. The report mentioned roof repairs pending and non-compliant drainage modifications. Curious, the homeowner checked local property records, and there it was, Nancy's roof repairs had never been formally approved by the HOA. She'd installed an unauthorized drainage system to reroute water runoff, something that could technically classify as a code deviation under Section 14C of the bylaws. The discovery felt almost unreal. The woman who had built her entire identity on enforcing rules had broken one herself, and not a minor one either. The homeowner gathered everything, the photos from public archives, the report excerpts, even the time-stamped permits that proved the repairs were incomplete. A full, airtight case. But rather than sending it straight to the HOA, they waited for the perfect moment. That moment arrived at the November HOA General Meeting, open to all residents. It was the first Nancy had attended since her suspension, sitting stiffly in the back row, arms crossed, expression cold. When the meeting opened for community concerns, the homeowner stood up and calmly presented the findings. The room fell silent. Each word landed with precision, factual, documented, impossible to refute. The homeowner spoke of integrity, of fairness, of holding everyone equally accountable to the rules they enforce. As the evidence was displayed on the projector, heads turned toward Nancy. Her face went pale, then red. The HOA president had no choice. The violation was clear, the penalty mandatory. Nancy was fined, ordered to bring her property into compliance within 30 days, and barred indefinitely from holding any HOA position again. A few neighbors clapped quietly. Others exchanged satisfied looks. Years of tension seemed to dissolve in that moment, replaced by something Maplewood hadn't felt in a long time, balance. But for Nancy, it was devastation. She left the meeting early, storming out without a word. For weeks, her blinds remained drawn. The once pristine house began to decay, weeds creeping up through cracks in the driveway, paint chipping from the shutters. She stopped waving to neighbors, stopped mowing her lawn. The symbol of order had become the image of neglect. Winter arrived. The snow fell thick and silent across the cul-de-sac, blanketing the lawns, erasing lines and borders. The birds still came, their tiny shapes hopping across the snow to feed beneath the homeowner's window. It was peaceful again, truly peaceful, until one morning, when something strange appeared on the roof. It wasn't large, barely visible at first under the frost, but as the snow melted in the sunlight, the shape revealed itself. A small ceramic gnome, half buried, painted red and white, smiling up at the sky. No one saw who placed it there. Maybe Nancy had done it herself, a final act of defiance. Or maybe it was a neighbor, a quiet tribute to the absurd war that had consumed the street for nearly a year. Whatever the case, it stayed there, perched at the edge of the shingles like a silent monument. The homeowner didn't remove it. They simply left it there, letting it weather through snow and wind, its colors fading slowly over time. The birds still came and went, fluttering past it as if acknowledging its strange place in the story. Months passed, and life in Maplewood Court returned to normal. The HOA became quieter, gentler, less intrusive. People started planting gardens again, painting their mailboxes whatever colors they wanted. The rules loosened, and laughter returned to the sidewalks, and yet, Every now and then, someone new would move into the neighborhood, notice the old ceramic gnome perched on the roof, and ask about it. The older residents would smile, shake their heads, and tell the story, the tale of the woman who tried to control the street and the neighbor who outsmarted her with nothing more than a handbook and a sense of humor. In the end, it wasn't really about bird feeders or gnomes. It was about balance, about how even in the most carefully controlled places, chaos finds a way to bloom, and order eventually learns to laugh at itself. As spring returned once more, the homeowner refilled the feeders, the birds sang freely, and the gnome, still smiling, still watching, remained right where it belonged.